All right, I'll start this out. Okay. Here today, Vorthos Mike. I write about art and things in the Magic universe, curate art shows and things of the sorts. And with me in installment 2 of a 35-year series, the art chat with Rhystic Studies himself, i.e. Magic Man Sam, i.e. Professor Sam. And we're here to talk about what today, Sam?
Today we're talking about War of the Spark. What's up, Mike? It's so great to talk to you about, i.e. Vorthos Mike, i.e. Milk the Best Dog. Man, we were talking for an hour and a half before we started, so I'm already like feeling goofy and stoked to talk about art. But yeah, today we're talking about War of the Spark. The set's about to launch, so we're right on the precipice of like when the hype is at its max. You know, the hype is at its max, and we get the whole card previews, so we get to see all of the art in the set. They just revealed the Planeswalkers, the Japanese Planeswalkers. We're going to talk about them. And basically, we're just trying to digest this thing before, 3 weeks from now when we move to the next thing, whatever it may be. So we figured right now is the best time to do this, and we have a lot to digest. So I'm very happy to do an art chat. This is installment 2 of the 35-year series.
So where we figured to start is we can go card by card, but people enjoy doing that. I stopped doing that as much with my art reviews because it discourages discovery. So instead, we have some themes here today that we're going through, and we want things to take at a larger level to really see where does this sit in place. Because thinking of how Sam and I work is, if you reread an article, if you watch a video 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, you can find some nuggets you didn't notice on first take, that it becomes a citation. So in order to do that, we said, well, let's start from the top. Let's start with the 10,000-foot view. Where strategically, looking at art direction, looking at the overall set, where does this sit that may be different compared to previous things?
Yeah, go ahead.
No. I the first thing I thought was just the guild mixes, right? We've seen 3-color things, obviously, with Tarkir, we've seen it in Alara, but this is different. This is not a traditional mix of guilds with their normal set in place. It's, well, I'm a Boros, but sometimes I'm this other person, and this acknowledge those things to say, well, when guilds work together, they still retain themselves, but they tend to work collaboratively with another guild, and they make a new spell. They make a new thing where they lower their fighting with each other to fight against a common enemy. And I thought that was a very simple, but such a great, nuanced way to learn more about your personal guild as it relates to working with other people that may disagree fundamentally with you on their worldview, right? So I liked seeing that. I think that can be done more, this mashup idea, as we return to worlds a little better. Like, for example, Phyrexians, that's neat, but what happens when those mix? How do they see their goal differ, which we hadn't really seen? And I know that's a little tropey, sure, but it just hasn't been done yet. This is the third revisit. You figure everything was covered, and that hadn't been. So I really liked seeing that.
Yeah, you mentioned the Festival of the Guilds Pact, or I forget the card name, but that was basically the last time on Ravnica where we saw a plane-wide celebration where the guilds are mixing and not fighting each other, because you're right, we do have this common enemy this time, in Invasion, and a gigantic invasion, and suddenly all the guilds are understanding that the problems ahead of them are bigger than themselves, but bigger than the little quarrels that they have. So I was looking at the card Plane-Wide Celebration in War of the Spark, and
Sure.
Finally we have that trope being reenacted, where you have the toppled over Nicol Bolas statue, the common enemy, finally being depleted and destroyed, and all the colors are uplifting. Everyone's cheering, and you can tell that this is no longer about the Gruul fighting the Azorius. It is everyone coming together and fighting for the plane. But it's a fun trope. I'm glad they leaned into it, and you're right. It's really not about the guilds anymore. It's definitely
not at all.
It's definitely a story about the planeswalkers, about the superheroes, and about the bigger picture of Magic and where Magic will be heading. So yeah, you're right. It's guild mixes.
I figured that piece was like, okay, this has not been done. What is things that have been done that people have been wanting? Because I don't know if people wanted to be like, I want a guild mix. Like, I don't know if they were asking for that compared to fan service.
Yep.
Did they deliver on that or what?
Yeah,
Oh my God.
so Ethan's been biting his tongue for whoever, I mean, for forever with one of these things, right?
Right.
You finally got Feather. You've been pining for Feather for
Do people
since
know
you were
that?
born.
I don't know if they do.
That's just your one quirk.
It's my one quirk. It's my one quirk. Just yelling at Ethan about where Feather, like where Feather. So
yeah.
finally sent me a tweet on it, and he's like, "Here, Feather." So if you read the original novels, the first three novels on Ravnica, Feather's a major character. She's the Boros angel, and she's everywhere. And she didn't get a card. And then years we returned, no card. Commander series that kind of dealt with Ravnica, no card. And then they made Anya, who's another Boros angel, and we're like, what? What are you doing? Where's Feather? What's going on? So it was great to finally see this beloved character get a card. The card's really good as a commander. Oh, biscuits.
Yeah, and it's a throwback from one of the older artists too, with Wayne Reynolds. So.
Right. And Wayne has made a bunch of Boros Angels before. He really worked. He worked on the concept push for the 2012 Return to Ravnica block, which is great. And that idea of that Boros Angel came from the original thing. Like, it hasn't changed a ton visually, because Thomas Giorello, the artist in way back when, just had it boom right away, and I have the concept there at my house, and it's beautiful. And then there was the other two that we saw.
So Massacre Girl is one that came up and it was referenced, right, in Gatecrash and flavor text.
Yep.
So that name and that character has been sitting around for anybody that reads the flavor text, on cards.
Which was nice.
Yeah, and here we have it. I don't know much about Massacre Girl, so maybe you know more.
No, honestly, the only thing I found is that she was in flavor text quite a bit. And anytime you reference someone enough times, you eventually, like, a flavor text team could force something into being because of that.
Yeah, you're right.
And that's just fantastic to see that they'll, like, the Demon's Cookbook, that's going to find its way into, like, an unset or something of the sort. But this was actually in, so I applaud them for having that in there and seeing the ability to say, oh, here's all the people that are in the set, named people, how many can we fit in, how many can't we, right?
Yeah, and the exact same trajectory happened with Fibblethip from Totally Lost from Gatecrash as well, I believe.
Right. And he's lost again, too. Oh, man.
Yeah. We found a character that everyone just clung to, which was, like, basically on a throwaway common, and then it became like a cult classic. Like, immediately everyone just loved this thing, and now it's become a legendary creature, which I love because it almost, to me, I saw a legendary creature and I was just stoked because it organically became a legendary creature, like in the real world. You know what I mean? It became legendary. So yeah, I just love seeing the development of that. That was a nod to fans, and I think everyone gravitated towards it. And I think it segues into this other idea that this set is just cosplay. The set, we've got so much in. Yeah, we already saw Fibblethip being cosplayed at MTG Niagara Falls.
Yep.
But I saw all the cosplayers on Twitter just like, I don't even know where to start. Like, I'm coming out of retirement, to work on some of these characters because we have so many planeswalkers.
So many planeswalkers, right? And having planeswalkers not only by themselves, but having spells to go with them too, so you see multiple iterations of them. And I think the same thing goes with narratives between planeswalkers, like the Sorin and Nahiri. They're still fighting even during a war, which I think is hilarious, but you get to see their character more. Every time you see them fighting with each other, you get to see more of their flow, you get to see how they move, and any part of that is always so welcome.
Yeah. I like that there's some sets where we can, like Dominaria last year, that R&D just leans into the enfranchised player. The new player doesn't know the Sorin Nahiri relationship very well.
Right.
Or the Massacre Girl thing, why that's funny, what Fibblethip is, and who cares if they're a new player. But for us, that's like a moment of rejoice. So it's cool when they can take those, and say, what's up, enfranchised player? I see you, and here's a gift.
Do you think that it was then balanced by how this preview season worked with the slow reveal?
Yeah, no, there's this common theme in your art reviews that I clung to very early on when I started reading them, which is the set is revealed in the commons. That's where we get to see the most, like, wiggle room. That's where we get to see most of the world, the small moments, the smaller characters. That's where the world is set up. And we'll talk about planeswalkers. Planeswalkers are essentially a character standing on something with the panorama of the setting in the background. We don't get too much world building or storytelling in the planeswalkers.
No, minimal.
Yeah, and those big boom boom mythic rares. But on the commons, like, yeah, that's where you can see 10 Street Market. That's where you can see inside of the Azoria Senate.
Totally.
So I think with this elongated preview season, 3 weeks, that was risky. I mean, that's a long time. But to have it in a sort of linear reveal that matches the storytelling, it made for some really cool moments, and for folks to start looking at the commons and paying a little more attention to them. So I think that was a cool way to show. I mean, that was always your biggest point of criticism. Like, hey, give some of the Vorthos guys the commons, because we'll make a big deal out of it.
Totally.
And we'll see things that
100%.
other people don't see, because we don't read the card text. We just look at the other stuff around it,
Right, and I think that was done so well here with these story spotlight signposts. And they had tried the story spotlights, and then Deicide came out early, and then you're like, oh, okay, Elspeth kills the guy. Oh, okay. Yep. Right, and then you're like, all right, well, neat. And it felt like it was a start and stop for these last few years. And that was quite some time ago, mind you. Theros wasn't last year, for Christ's sake.
No kidding.
But so they've had this thing, like, well, we've had this plan since Kaladesh. Sure, and that was a couple years ago now. But this idea they've wanted to do, but did you have the trust in place?
Yeah.
Right, like, did you have the trust of not someone breaking street date?
Yep.
And a couple things came into place. One is the pros all being sponsored by Wizards.
True.
That league allowed them to say, we need you to do it on this date, at this time, in this area. And by them being like pseudo staffers, they're like, oh yeah, of course, man, that's totally cool. Like, there was no issue with it. And then,
and how many, like, what a small victory that, like, I saw so many spikes, quote unquote, on Twitter that were like, hey, I've never been into Magic Story. Where do I start? This whole thing has been, like, super intriguing.
100%.
And so that's a win, when the audience that you did not expect. I mean, it's the same for some of my videos. Like, sometimes I get those comments like, hey, I don't really care about art, but your videos are sweet. And that's always a victory. It's like, hell yeah, we're finally getting the folks that we want to talk to.
Right. But if you can get the hardcore people that want to just, look at a 5 on Uno, the most enfranchised to take a look at it, imagine what that's doing for brand new people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if someone's been here forever and they're like, he hasn't hooked me, imagine being like a 14-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing this in the store, and you're seeing like an LGS that's like, oh man, we just had this new thing, and there's new signposts, and there's a story in place, and it's been going on for years. And they're like, who's Nicol Bolas? How do I learn about Kaladesh? Who's this Tezzeret guy? Like, it's such a shared, fun moment that encourages people to have this conversation behind the scenes or in group chat or whatever. And I'm tickled by it. Like, I this has to be the new normal. It has to.
Yeah, it can't not be. It's also a fun way, when they announce that they're going to start switching between worlds far quicker. It used to be like you do 3 sets on a world, so you live in that place for like a greater half of 9 or 10 months. And by the 3rd set, everyone's just like, gosh, are we still on Theros? Like, come on,
Right.
So we switch worlds a bunch, but then we have this moment where we get to see Tezzeret again. And so for those players that loved the Kaladesh little arc, we got to see Tezzeret, and we saw Dovin, and then those of us like me who just like absolutely adored Amonkhet. When I saw Amonkhet, motifs and aesthetics coming back in Ravnica, I was over the moon, because I wasn't actually done living on that world. So
I agreed, and even that was tested, right? Like, we saw that in Magic Origins.
Yeah,
when they had the 5 different planeswalkers, right, with the 5 different worlds.
Yep.
And it was in a core set, so the barrier's low, the risk is a little lower perhaps.
Yeah.
And we got to see that, and that wasn't that long ago. But it was testing for this.
Yeah, so what about the flip side then? What is the result? Because I was scrolling through Scryfall, and I'm like, this is like actually just like a potpourri of a set. This is a core set essentially, where core sets can have the free reign of saying, all right, I'm going to take a weird Mer from Mirrodin, and I'm going to place it in the same world as a vampire from Innistrad, and there's not going to be any sort of glue binding them together, narratively speaking. And so when you scroll through War of the Spark, just as a collective whole, you kind of get that. You're like, wait, this is Ravnica, and then this is Amonkhet, and then this is Kaladesh, and it's all in the same set. So it's kind of overwhelming and a little, if you just took 2 random cards from War of the Spark, I'm not sure that they talk to one another They all serve the greater purpose of having this gigantic war and bringing all of the, the iconic pieces of the signposts, like you were saying, from the worlds we visited in the last 4 or 5 years. But yeah, so my
isn't it everything? Is everything okay?
Yeah, exactly.
This has everything.
Yep, it has everything. We have a dinosaur yelling a la the end of Jurassic Park 1, in the same world where we have, like what you were saying, Soren fighting Nahiri with Ugin, and there's a spider. There's so much on the collective.
Well, they tested this too, right? They tested this with Battlebond. When they said, how many different things can we have going on? How ridiculous can we get without going unset, right? Because that's what Battlebond tested that to say, like, wizard sports. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's a little weird, but all right, you do you, man. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, what can we have it more stylistically different? And you're like, well, yeah, I guess people want that more. People really like that Seb McKinnon guy. You goofy Canadian needs more of that. And then it's, okay, what if we put everything in one plane? The same as Dragon's Manes was. We're like, oh, we're going to have all 10 guilds in one thing. Can it still work? And it can.
Yeah.
But in doing that, you can't keep the guilds in place. And I think that is the one piece as the potpourri fell apart. It no longer became Ravnica. But I think that's okay because of this third set, as you mentioned. Journey and Nyx got boring because they're like, man, I'm bored of Theros. And they learned people prefer 2-set blocks, but the rapid change is very hard for art teams, design teams. You need to make brand new style guides rapid fast. And that team's not real big. But if you do have these where you put everything in, what is there to do, right?
So the Ravnica thing, I made a point in my video recently, like the very first Ravnica set before the 2 expansions after, just Ravnica City of Guilds. Ravnica is in the background. We understand we're on a city, but we don't know that city yet, right. This kind of feels the same way. There's a city in the background, but this war could have happened anywhere, it feels like. The city is no longer its own character and its own setting and its own feel. It's more like just a stage where the characters are in the center of the frame are 100% of the action. But the one unifying element amidst all this potpourri, which you made a point about in your article, is this narration with the lands. Like the basic lands are still 100% Ravnica.
Right. And I think that tied them there. Right, we did have the Project Lightning bug that you had to have it there because that's how the Planeswalkers figure out to come, and then they get stuck there because of the Immortal Sun, right? Fine. But you could have changed it to Dominaria. Like, in theory, you could have. But this build-up over this much time allows us to have a narrative in the set, which they planned all the way through, signposts of the story settings. I asked for basic lands as preview cards because I knew, okay, if you're going to have Ravnica, you're just not going to show the same Ravnica things again. They have to be somehow tied. And this is the first time we've seen this, where it's a moment in time as you can see the war develop and the sparks flying up to, where Nicol Bolas is standing. And that we hadn't seen. Like, we saw it in Lorwyn to Shadow War, right? Like, you saw the same land and then it becomes Shadow Morified or whatever. But you didn't see it in the same set.
I guess the only caveat to that would be like it kind of reminds me of the Amonkhet Hour of Devastation transition, where we saw the lands established, and then we saw the effect of Bolas and the river turns to blood and it's a sunset and stuff like that. But you're right. This is where we can we're grounded in Ravnica here amidst all the chaos that's going on in all the other cards with the narratives. Within the land.
This has to beg the question of, okay, you had the narrative of lands, this all goes forward, you can see where the thing ends, Nicol Bolas is stuck on the plane, what have you. Is this a hard reset? And this is where I would think a year from now to say, was this the moment where we can't call it the mending, because it's not the mending. That changed a storyline thing that they had to clear up, and they worked on a bunch of continuity to get those things. This is not that. But in a timeline where Star Wars is ending their second run and then will be restarting, Avengers are at their end game and then restarting on a new cycle of multiple years, is this just the natural cycle of things, going to Ravnica every 6 to 7 years? Or is this cultural zeitgeist of sort? To say, this is what people do now. You get all your major characters, and every 6 years you go one big thing, and then you reset. You do Gotham instead of Batman, right? Now he's young or whatever. Very comic book from the 70s and 80s. And then you reset into that. And I think that's to be seen. But I think this is going to be the moment where we have to ask that question.
Yeah, it's very similar to the television format where you have these characters that really that can be recycled through. I'm thinking about Game of Thrones even, where all of a sudden all of the, similar to what we were saying with the guilds, like all these enemies, once enemies have to come together for the common threat, every 10 years we get a new Batman. We get a new celebrity who becomes Batman. Every 10 years we get a new celebrity who becomes James Bond. We have the ability to reset even if there is a conclusive narrative arc. And I think you're right. So hopefully with this little video, with our little discussion, we can kind of explore further what's going to happen next, what's going to happen with Magic next, what's going to happen with Ravnica next, and what's going to happen with storytelling and R&D. So okay, War of the Spark. How do you summarize it in one word? I think it's Planeswalkers, right?
Sure.
This is the Planeswalkers Matter set from just a mechanical perspective. You can summarize a lot of these sets just based on that. Theros was in the enchantment set.
Sure. Right.
Kaladesh was at artifact set. So this is the plane. So they finally went Planeswalker tribal, and to me, this was like a nice breath of fresh air in terms of just reinventing, mechanically speaking, the card type. But with Planeswalkers, from an art perspective, what can you do with them? What can you do with a Planeswalker and 36 of them, 36 characters from totally different worlds? What's going on? Like, how did they evolve from the core set? I kind of want you to talk me through Planeswalkers.
Well, it's a person standing there, right? At the end of the day, it's a person standing there. Sometimes it's an animal or humanoid, sure, fine. But conceptually, you have the full frame, so it's someone standing. There's not that many different ways you can have a person standing and it be visually interesting. Like and I understand that there's some really popular marquee walkers of Planeswalker dragons that traditional paints are going bonanza on the secondary market. I'm aware. Part of it, cripes. But at the end of the day, there's not a ton you can do. But at least there have been some precedent that they get to play with. They've been core sets like Chandra's or Garrick's, the marquee spells that they've had, to the Planeswalker decks, which I think have been a fantastic thing for introductory players. How fun. I'm a blue, I played a little bit of blue deck. I want to get the Ralzeric Planeswalker deck. Which, really interestingly enough, quick side note, the guild kits that we released during this block right here, mark my words, those are going to become some of the most important things for Commander ever.
Oh, yeah.
Easily. Quite possibly. I had a buddy of mine, Nate Weber, did a Ravnica League, and we got a bunch of packs, and he got us packs from different sets, and then one of the guild kits. And he's like, we're going to make a Commander deck, and everyone gets to be on the same footing there, and this will be their deck that we can always play, so we never have one that's out of place.
Cool.
And that thing is incredible.
Yeah.
But it really comes through, and you get a Planeswalker for it, and it's fantastic. So, side note there, wonderful product there. Please keep making those. But even then, to say, okay, well, you had Planeswalker packs. They made the Jace pack, with the James Arnold, beautiful graphic design, cool. To finally, here's a set with them. In Lorwyn, you could not do this. 2 years later, you couldn't do this. You couldn't do this 3 years ago. It just wouldn't have been possible yet. Because they had to test out, how can you show a Planeswalker on a card, but then he's not the Planeswalker themselves? Is that okay? How does that work? What's the market research on those sort of things? Except there were some that were... There was the one goof. There's the 5 goofy ones. So
yes. Yeah.
We need to talk about these. We talked these on precast. We got to talk about them.
So in Amonkhet, the Amonkhet block, we had cards that showed the Planeswalker's defeat. That world was all about establishing Nicol Bolas as the villain, the powerful villain that can take down the Planeswalkers. Finally, we have a match, capable of actually posing some sort of threat to these heroes we followed for years. So they had cards that were like Chandra's defeat, Gideon's defeat, Jace's defeat, right? We had a cycle of defeat cards where you have the Planeswalker like wiped out in some form, and they all connected like, cycle cards usually do. Now because War of the Spark is essentially, a victory for the good guys, quote unquote, right? Nicol Bolas is supposedly dead or falls, we have a cycle of cards called X's Triumph, the 5 marquee cards for each color. The result then is what we talked about, a very narrow art direction. Essentially, you have half of a face, right? We have half of a face on the left side, excuse me, with a sort of emblematic element of that planeswalker and the moment in which they kind of do their big planeswalker superhero thing in the story. For example, Jace's Triumph with Bolas Citadel in the background. Nissa's Triumph with an elemental in the background raising Vitsugazi, but the result is like, it's almost hokey, it's almost just too narrow and too emblematic of like the bad side of the color pie, which is the color pie is just the most easy dividable way to categorize 5 different core ideas, and that's to me kind of that's always been my bone to pick with the color pie, with having planeswalkers that represent an entire very nuanced spectrum of things, just represented by the color of those things, like,
and only one color, right?
And only one, exactly.
Right.
There's no nuance. There's not enough nuance. It's too Power Rangers It's too,
ooh, that's fair. That's fair.
Easy to chew on. It's too like, it's just, and it's not that I want more depth, but it's almost contrived because of how simple it is, So to me, this is what those cards read like. They're just they're maybe flat,
They're not. I don't think they're terrible. I think there could have been better solutions for them. I like the idea because really this summarizes the set, right? Like, this is what they did, this is what they did, this is what they did, this is what they did. Like, neat. That's great. But 5 years from now, these without being in the set is like, what? There's no context, right? It's like, okay, this was a character growth 5 years ago, and then you're like, okay, what was their triumph over again? Like, oh yeah, over Bolas, and you're like, okay, but the art doesn't need to be that. It feels like to me this is a core set idea, or like a portal, like a portal second age, where it's like, oh, you play your planeswalker and then you get the better spell, and you're like, yeah, I guess that's true. Like, it's made for like a intro level commander, but should that be in an expansion set? Right? Like, looking at these amongst everything else, you're like, there's 36 planeswalkers. Why did you use the 5 ones that are market tested the most, and including the one that died, to put in here, when you could have saved this for a commander set? You could have saved it for a core set, whatever those could be, and instead you lose like a third of the artwork to a half a face that isn't needed, frankly, at all. And instead you could have had a solution in the art to do that. Obviously, this is a year ago, so any sort of feedback we give is largely worthless to anyone actually making cards, but I do think the feedback from seeing this is what I would see a TCG just getting their feet under them to say, we got Grom Iron Fist, and here's his triumph, right? And they'd have, like, the guy, like, really just in the middle of the thing, and he won the thing, too. And they're like, well, okay, but that's such a strict art direction piece, such a strict written, this is what it needs to be. There's no other options. And some of those other options could be more nuanced, because surely these things don't read Ravnica at all. I mean, they're kind of, there's some symbols of the war, but Gideon's, you're like, all right, there's blue guys, and then Chandra, blue guys on Dovin's on fire. Oh, okay. That's interesting. I would rather see like a scene they did, or an after effect, as I've talked about in spells. You either do before, during, or after. And here it's, Nissa's is kind of during, Chandra's is, during the end, Gideon's after, Jace's is during, and Liliana's is kind of during. And even that piece doesn't pull me somewhere, other than this is for an introductory player to play cards, and they might be fun in the future, because none of them are overbearingly difficult to jump in there. But at the same time, you're gonna find a couple things that are weird in a set with 36 planeswalkers. You're bound to when planeswalkers are at uncommon, right? Like, how ridiculous is that to say, oh, Tybalt back in the day, you should have made him an uncommon. He would have worked great.
Yeah. Yeah, this is back to me just very stoked as a player to see some new narrative design or some new mechanical design and some new design spaces being explored and having the guts to do it on your gigantic blockbuster superhero set, you know.
Well, then what did they do to if that's enough, right? If that's enough, knowing that they have line item budget bean counters from their overlords they must serve to.
Yeah.
There are no masterpieces, right?
Yeah.
There are no hollow foils or something goofy in the set. But there was something that was special here.
Yeah, it was the big bomb of this week, the Japanese planeswalkers. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you about this because you went to Japan to do a big art show there, and I know that you had a very awesome cultural experience with the way the Japanese kind of related to the Magic art and what Magic means to the Japanese players and how they navigate Magic in a way that's maybe different than us in the States.
Right, and I didn't think they were going to do it. I really didn't think so. Knowing that it's a global game, they tested this Chinese concept, right, of the Chinese-only cards, right? And Mark Rosewater said on the blog talk, he's like, yeah, we're not going to do that again. And whether they will or not, and, you know, if Mark's to be end-all, be-all there, but I was like, okay, well, they're not going to do region-specific things. Because in my world, what I would do to have some sort of Innistrad set, and there'd be, like, Albert Durer woodcuts as alternate art, or, like, Grim Fairy Tale tie-in cards, of some variety that are like deep German lore. Because Grim Fairy Tales weren't like Cinderella wasn't one story. There was like 80 different variations of it. That's what I'm like. Oh my god, that's gonna be possible now. Or like a Korean folktale, or like a Russian one. Like, oh, that's gonna be amazing.
Yeah.
And instead, they had Japan wants to get a little bit of flavor here. They don't have any masterpieces. Remember, they stopped doing those. And instead, you needed that extra push to get it to 11. And I did see some previews of this as we were doing this art show and giant exhibition in Japan. It was a huge deal. Really, people outside of Japan didn't really hear about it, and they should have because it was incredible. Because we had 2 animators there. So in this Japanese exhibition, it was in a train station, which is unusual, in a gallery there, and we had like 15,000 people go through in like 7 days. Like, it was absurd how many people came through. Like 15,000 people in 7 days is nuts. Some museums only get like 30,000 to 60,000 a year.
Jeez.
You know, just to see perspective, like it was insanity. But in one part of it, I did the paintings, and that was cool. They commissioned 2 animators. The first was one of the key animators for Akira, and he did a fan art little clip, 2 minutes, and he just did whatever he wanted and showed some of his style with interacting with some Magic characters and just showed this really interesting. I'm like, it's like an anime, I guess. Yeah. But there were all these self-contained little things, and then they had one of the animators for Naruto make one as well, and it had like the different characters, and there was a Nicol Bolas right at the end of one of them, and I'm like, okay, that's neat. What else do you got? And they're like, well, we're working with some other artists. And I'm like, all right, that's neat. Not thinking anything of it at the time. Like, thought nothing. And the story, what behind it was they were been working, trying to get Amano in forever, who did this Final Fantasy original artworks, like, gigantic name in Japan. It's like, in the RPG community there, it's like a Todd McFarlane or, you know, Mike Mignola with Hellboy. Like, it's larger than those even. Like, it's not quite Walt Disney, but closer-ish for someone that's still alive. And by having that Liliana thrown up on April Fool's Day, and they're like, oh, there's a Liliana, and there's this guy that made it on April Fool's, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty neat. And then it becomes cards? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Because this is a crossover of leveling up. Like we're not in a basement anymore. We're not just in an LGS. We're going to use the main marquee artists, and Japan is huge on that. I didn't believe Heiko when he talked about that much. Where there's this sense that you play at the pros shop. If you have all the choices of where you go, you play at the professional shop because that's where the best players are. Just by osmosis, being close to that, you gain the skills and the stupid flicky card thing that whatever players do that drives me bananas. Like, you learn the skills, you learn the things just by being close to it. So this idea of this fame and notoriety is very, very important there. So it wasn't random fan artists that just happen to be Japanese or have some connection. They literally went out and said, who are the biggest names? Who are the people that did giant anime properties? And we want to get as many of them as we can. And that's what they did. They literally went out there, and the team is really small for Magic Japan. It's like 3-4 people, and they're wonderful. They're super nice, but it's tiny. It's tiny, and they're in Renton, and they go back to Japan all the time. But they really went to the top down and tried to get every major person, and somehow they did this. And I think this has being done by not having masterpieces. They did this instead using the unhinged model of the unlisted art with multiple different artworks as proving ground. Again, Unset's doing that, into saying, okay, well, if they can hire the Akira animator for an exhibition, an art show, really, what other ones can they do? And then they're like, all right, well, let's go one level above that. What if we did alt art cards just for Japan? And now that is going to be the thing. I mean, not even close. I mean, other countries can't even touch this at all. I mean, Brazil doesn't even have the properties to come on this on a global scale. It doesn't exist. Like, the closest thing would be like, I don't know, like K-pop, I guess, if Koreans would get something like that. Even Germans, I mean, they do not have the global recognition of artists in major marquee properties of this. I mean, it's unparalleled. It would be us getting like Marvel comic artists to work on that. Like giant titans of industry to do things. It just wouldn't be possible in the US. They'd be like, no, we're good. And there they did, because it's a cultural importance thing to be like, would you be part of Magic? It's very important to us. We also would love to invite you into our world. And I think this arena buildup of we're a bigger brand than we should be. No. We need to be a bigger brand because we actually are larger. We are now an esport and we need to act like it. So kudos to them for actually swinging for the fences. I think that's just lovely. Is there any arts that you really jumped out at you, obviously, other than the Liliana Amano?
Yeah, so one quick thing to add to that is the Shivam thread where he kind of dissects all of the artists that were guested for this. If you want to check that out. Yeah, Unstoppable. Perfect research work. You know, that's the kind of stuff that Mike and I gravitate towards, because that's going to be a citation, you know?
For years.
Oh, for years. Like, we're going to go back to the tweet in a year. Like, who were those artists again? Oh, let me look at the Shivam thread for a really quick digest on, like, what big properties they were working on. And it's a segue for us, you know. I don't know most of these artists. I don't follow that. That's not my niche. So it was perfect. So shout out to Shivam for that. Yeah, couple of marquee cards that I really like, for reasons that we mentioned prior. This new Kiora is really sweet because it's not just a character standing on a rock in front of the panorama of the place we're at. You know, it's like there's much more motion, there's much more movement, there's some spice because Kiora summons the big beasts, and it was a really cool composition that you don't normally see on a. This is more of like what you were saying earlier, the Planeswalker spell, not the Planeswalker themselves. You know, so this was a perfect, and this is a perfect kind of arena to do such a thing where we're not introducing this Planeswalker. Like, maybe this doesn't work as well when we don't know who Kiora is.
Fair, totally.
You know, but if we've seen Kiora before twice now on different Planeswalker cards, we get her, you know, her thing, her gist, and we can kind of see the art direction expand a little bit. So I thought the Kiora thing was really cool, and it's hopeful for future art direction of Planeswalkers. So we move away, from the static composition directions. And the other one is Domri for the same reason. You know, Domri is more dynamic. It almost has a Raymond Swanland vibe.
Yeah, I get that.
This is a close-up. We don't see all of Domri. Usually that's part of the Planeswalker shtick, is like through the transparent border, the artists will compose it in a portrait style so that it works with the vertical card frame, and you can kind of see some of the the rest of it through the card frame. But this is kind of ignoring that. I also really liked the Huatli just breaking the card frame.
Yeah,
and
with
almost
the dino, come on.
Yeah, it's fun because now we're breaking the card frame. Like it's perfect. It's a perfect little extra spice. I also liked it from a marketing perspective because, like I said before, this is the blockbuster, gigantic superhero sets. So obviously, you're gonna put the most money into the compositions. We're gonna hire these artists in hopes that some ancillary artists or some ancillary audiences will come into Magic because now they have a segue. Like, oh, I've been playing Final Fantasy my whole life. I love this artist. I've been following my whole life. They just did a really sweet composition for this game I've heard about but never tried. Maybe this is my segue there. So it can be, obviously, Magic is a business. You want to make smart business decisions, and
the free press,
it's
free every
press.
Final Fantasy blog is talking about this.
Yep.
Everything talking about anime is like, Magic, what?
Yeah, I actually want to ask you, like, do you think that this visual art direction kind of works for Magic? Will it work in just a small sliver? Like, there was Gavin posted a poll, like, should we do this all the time? It's like, nah, don't do it all the time. It's a nice little spice, but you can't eat a dish that's just all paprika,
Totally
like,
right.
That's just not gonna
I
work,
think there's
so.
a way that people have been clamoring for. I want different art. I want more variety.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've mentioned this 1,000 times, it is a player base age. When you join the game, you don't have a $1,000 deck. You don't have rares and mythics everywhere. You have commons, and guess what? There's a lot of variety in commons all the time. But here, it's responding to those people to say, well, it is nostalgia that, all the card art is a lot more different than you remember it to be, because when you joined the game, you didn't have the narrow set of cards that were used on Mythic cards. Like, you'll see Tyler Jacobson a lot more in decks than you'll see John Stanko. And that's okay. But here, it's actually responding to that to say, okay, you want variety? All right, let's do it live. We're going to have anime-influenced friggin' artists all over the place. How do you like them apples?
And now, the ongoing joke is like all the Americans want them too,
Totally. But, I think about that to say, okay, what cultures can do this? American can have these, sure, that's fine. But I do think that having a couple of these alt art things in place is healthy. And we had it for the art show in Japan with the Scott Fisher promo Sarah Angel, and that's neat. But I do think this region-locked buy-a-box promo could be one avenue that you could have, all right, we're going to have a Korean artist make this one. We're going to have a Brazilian artist do this one that is very vibrant and colorful, like we would see more often in that culture. That, I think, is going to be the ramification of it. Judge promos, things of that variety. And I want that. Like,
yeah,
who is the big deal Russian artist right now? I don't quite know, but they would. And then that becomes this new bling piece that people can go for, where it's like, oh, it's region locked, but it encourages us to have a global game. And I heard this everywhere. Like, I used to have an English only rule for my cube. Yeah, I know you saw this too, and they're like, I'm making exceptions for this because the art's that sweet.
Yep.
That is incredible to lock in a deck building thing for cube players that spend a ton of time curating. And they're like, no, I have to make a change because the art is sweet. That is so successful because those things will be sought over for years to see.
Yeah, I'm always my biggest shtick is always like, how can Magic make me a better person in the real world? How can it make me learn more about the world instead of vice versa? Like, I don't want to learn more about Magic. I want Magic to be the springboard where I go and research. Now I'm gonna research Japanese art. Like, why does it look like this? You know what I mean? Like, it's such a cool learning moment when you can do that, and this is a gateway and a segue to do that. So.
Sam, I just watched Akira front to back like a month ago.
Incredible.
Yep, like, I never had any friends into anime. I had no friends. I grew up in a small town. None of my friends in high school or college. So for me, it's this like, I'm aware of references and I understand what these things are. Yes, sure. But I haven't watched an entire series. Like, I haven't binge watched any of those. So for me, I'm getting access into like, okay, you got to finally, do this. And then having community members that like Shivam are like, oh, here's what these things are all referencing. And then it's like when I see someone brand new to the game and I point out little things to them, like, oh, there's a face in the back of Ponder, and they're like, what? I'm literally in the opposite seat, and I get such a thrill out of that.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's like when I join the game again with an opposite culture. So I mean, this needs to happen again. I want to see this again, and I think the free press alone will probably make it financially viable into the future, no question. If the fact that Gavin and other people are asking about it, yeah, they're researching how to do it better, faster, harder, stronger, right? Well, Sam, if that is something that's fantastic in the set, we haven't talked about the wins.
I know.
We haven't
this
talked
is
about,
the best part.
We haven't talked about what the best part is the taste. And you got a little bit of flavor. So I got a couple.
Fox
things.
Point, Michael. Fox Point.
Fox Point. It's the green peppercorns. It gets you. It gets you. I only have a couple points here. The first I want to talk about is digital artists moving to traditional. This is the first set where it was very visible that they're doing that. We saw Joseph Meehan with Phyrexian Scriptures not long ago transition over, and he's like, oh, biscuits, I need to do this more often. We're like, yeah. But here we saw two people from opposite sides of the world, right? Our boy Shvetlin in Bulgaria, and then Jeju in freaking the Sichuan region of China. Both moving digital to traditional because of market demand. I could not be more overjoyed in seeing that working since I do art shows. That not only are digital artists working in pencils to have a sketch in place, but they're like, well, there's a financial benefit, sure, but there's also this community aspect where I could show my art. There's an ephemera piece, and Tyler Walpole talked about this. He's like, man, it's really therapeutic to paint. It's just, yeah, it's frustrating, but there's something about it that's just soothing.
Yeah, it's true. It's the same in music I talk about all the time, like digital music had a renaissance with tech just being available to everyone. You can open up a laptop and compose an entire EDM song, but I think there's always going to be a giant respect and admiration and the sort of, aura and essence that an actual physical piece of art will possess, in the same way that like being around someone who can play the piano, just sit down in the middle of the airport and play that piano, like that always will have an extra, just that slight extra level of, just mystery and feel to it. So
I don't want to say it's better though. Like I don't think it's a better
never.
thing, but I like that they have the option is there and we are responding to the variety. And I think that's a huge win for support of things in a hyper digital age.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And I bet the artists are like learning, the second you pick up that paintbrush, you're like, oh, smokes, this is, I just learned something new I can apply to the digital piece that I have to make,
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. I fully agree there.
So Svetlin, what did he do? Because you were making a big deal about this. This is a Simic commander, right?
Svetlin, yeah.
Svetlin,
our Bulgarian boy. No, he did the Simic commander, the Rolex, the Apex hybrid. And that it's acrylic. So acrylic it's an it's a plastic based paint. So you have to paint a little quicker because it dries so quickly compared to oil paint, where you could have a red that literally doesn't dry for days. Quite literally, you could put your palette in the freezer and then you could pop it back out, bingo bango. But his looks like watercolor. He just mixed it real thin, almost like a Warhammer painter that they get those.
Cool.
Those things are just such a heavy paint. But he did it so thin that people don't know yet that it looks like a watercolor. It's almost like Jeremy Jarvis's pieces back in the day where like, this is watercolor? Are you kidding me? Like, you think about the watercolor, it's like a little kid does, and there's like a frog and something. But that thin, nuancy, super tight, super controlled thing, he did in acrylic to look like watercolor, and it keeps that autumn feel of War of the Spark in place. I was floored by it. I'm like, wow, you need to make 100 of these, man.
Yeah,
he's like, oh
seriously.
yeah, well, it was kind of fun. Oh, I think I'll do some more like this. It's like, yes, good.
Good. Yeah, and the croc was that too. I almost bought the croc, man. I was so close.
Croc. Yeah, he had another piece in there, the Assassin's Token, which I think
That's
he
right.
did a pretty good job on.
Yeah.
And it's one of the few traditional ones of that to see the Golgari going pretty, which I'm a huge fan of, because otherwise it's like, well, there's zombies and they're like dirty and it's underdark. It's like, no. Think of Project Runway with the fungus and the beautiful dress made out of the ugly decaying elements, or the meat dress of Lady Gaga. And he really played up on that to say, well, why can't you have a pretty elf that's in the Golgari Guild? That they exist too. So that cosplayers say, I can wear that. There's even a cosplayer that got hit up like 30,000 times every time that art was passed around. They'd be like, it looks like you. And she's like, I know, yes, I'm aware.
It's true.
That was pretty good.
That croc was sweet. I mean, I think I have an affinity for these crocs because I saw it and I'm like, that's Amonkhet. You can tell with the Eternal and the croc. You're like, yeah, and it looks so good. The scales were just tasty. I want to take a bite out of that painting, you know?
It's on canvas piece. But you were hyping someone else. Who caught your eye that other people might not have seen?
So my boy Sid. I just can't not talk about Sid. I can't wait to talk about him. He's my next artist study. He's flying under the radar, and he's been secretly just like 15 out of 10 on anything he produces. Speaking about crocodiles, actually back in Fate Reforged, when he did his croc for Fate Reforged, that was the first time he caught my eye. I was like, oh, this is tasty. So Sid leveled up huge in War of the Spark. And again, he's just kind of flying under the radar because, you know, he's still on these commons and uncommons. And Pouncing Lynx is really the card that you and I can talk about, just because Sid has this fantastic thread on Twitter where it's just artists that he likes, that you can tell he's a student. So he's just and you know, he must spend half his day just still studying. Like he's just going to be the guy that becomes a student for his whole life because he just loves the craft and the medium. So if you scroll through it, you like, after about 50 or 60 artists, you're like, okay, I can see the influences coming through. Like he really loves these dynamic, highly narrative pieces with well-composed figures that are very painterly but expressive. Pouncing Lynx really, to me, is a reflection of all of his influences. You know, he really likes telling an entire story in one piece, and this is the colors are fantastic. There's just so much movement. Shivam.
You need to compare. Why do people know this? Like, people have seen this before, but they don't know why they've seen this before.
Yeah. What? Tell me, Mike. What do you think?
Everyone's seen this before. So by looking through his influences, you can start to see these heavy narrative pieces are this. It's almost like World War II bonds, right? Where a Norman Rockwell piece is very character focused, and you're forced to look at face to face to face, and you see the narrative as it's fully plotted out and planned. And Sid's has this like innate ability. It's almost like value studies for Chris Ron, where it's just innate. It just oozes out of him, and you can't really explain it all the time. He's like, well, yeah, that's just how it would look. Camaraderie, of course. They'd be standing on a thing and looking like your squad on the weekend, right? And I'm like, no, how? What? No. How do you get that? And he's like, and he just composes it. And the Pouncing Lynx is that was the piece that I'm like, man, this is like a Norman Rockwell scene of like a cat running into like the firehouse.
Yeah.
Right? Like the cat runs into the firehouse and a dog is chasing it, and it's a basset hound, and it's like a little bit of comical because the basset hound can't quite see and the cat's running them, but people are like jumping away and someone's laughing at it. And it has this such deep, fun, playful thing to read into that you want to give him every scene. And I've seen this for years on him, like really complex Star Wars scenes. He just had no trouble with. He was just like, oh yeah, I'm going to put all these people in there and I'm going to focus the action in. And now he's actually flexing a little bit to show, okay, I can do this digitally, like he did in Ravnica Allegiance, but I can do it traditionally too. Seeing things like Demon of Catastrophes, where it's like, I need to make a demon. I'm going to reference a Disney movie. And that cool with everybody? That cool? Okay, yeah, we're going to do that. You know, and like he's like, it's not Fantasia? He's like, don't worry about it, it's fine. And he's just whipping it in there, and I'm looking at this and say, like, I see what you're doing here, homie. Yeah. And for some of them, you want him to get like a scene of like 3 people in a battle, because a Planeswalker is just a single person standing there, and he's had some tokens and things, which is a person standing there, but it's still a battle scene with a snapshot. And I think that snapshot motion where you get to be in the scene, like the blind blast of you can feel the pain of the thing happening because he's so emotive in there.
Yeah.
You need to look at his cards closer, is what I need to say. And when he posts them, absolutely just take a minute and just dig in and look at everyone's faces and how they interact with each other. You know, the derpy wolf and camaraderie, like just staring off in the distance. And like,
you would talk about the dog.
I would have talked about the course if I had talked about the dog. But it's something that we're not seeing as much. It's, you know, we talk about Seb a lot because stylistically he's so different. But Sid is quite different here, like compared to other pieces. And people need to take note. They really do. I'm waiting for that big boom card he has that makes everyone stop, and then you see your hipsters like Sam and I being like, "Oh yeah, we know about him for years." You can see him all smart at your F&M about it. But if that's the quiet win, you know, the quiet win is Sid keeps leveling up. What are some major pieces that you saw in this set?
The major piece that caught a lot of attention on Twitter, I was hoping it would catch a lot of attention, you know, in the market as well, because this is a timeless piece. This is Pancoast's Tolsimir. You know, to me, this is, I think everyone, like speaking of you know, reactions on Twitter and other artists seeing other artists, like Pancoast posted this, and suddenly every artist in Magic went and commented like, "Oh,
come on,
this is
man.
This is the dunk, and we have no say. Like, this is it for us." They started cursing, like you said. You know?
Yep. As always needs to be. It's everything you need. It's the commander you want to play. You know, just by art alone, right? Like, you know, it's a 5-drop. It does a thing. It's a fun commander. It's not overpowering, but it's still really good, and it's in fun colors. But it does everything that the commander art would be, right? It shows the character. It shows what the ability is. It shows a dynamic scene. It's huge. The painting is enormous. And it references another property. So you could put it in your living room and you're like, what's going on here? They're like, oh, it's kind of like a Lord of the Rings thing. And they're like, okay, that's cool. But it's for him showing that he's like, I can do good things. You should give me more legendary things. And they're like, oh, okay, we'll do that. Neat. Thanks, Ryan. Love you.
Yeah, it's been super cool to watch him just grow and get more attention with the Healy last year, and then Arlen Corden this set as well, plus this gigantic, just
this
like
masterpiece, this straight up masterpiece. Like, this will be in Spectrum, the art annual. Yep.
The light. Just look at the light. You know, you always talk about light, man. Just tell me about the light. Where is it, and why is it there, and what is it doing?
Well,
you know,
he makes maquettes. Maquettes are like the clay things, you know, that show with that you put a lamp next to it and you can see the light. Ryan dresses up in like junior high football gear to show like armor. It's super adorable, actually. He makes gumroads of them, and for here you could see the, you know, the armor thing, and man, it's like a shoulder pad. I love it. But then he deconstructs it for the light. You could see it hitting directly on that elf's temple, and then by doing that, it allows him at card size to light the wolf behind him too. So he thought about methodically, okay, crap, how do I get this war scene, 2 characters in it, huge, but it still reads at card size. So if I have a white wolf, neat, that'll help. But I need to shine some light on it, because on the back left, you can see it's actually darker. You know, he muted out some of the fur, so he put the light source right in the middle on the person's face, but it's next to white, so you're not fighting the gold saddle. Because the gold saddle would then glow too if the light is right hitting it. So it's this low light, almost at, not at dawn, but like right before that's happening, it hits the horizon and it shoots you right in the face. And you can see the things behind it where the light either hasn't hit there or it's dropping in the day. The sword will glow up in it too that he intended, whether it's magical or not, it's fine. There's not much more to say other than like that blue on each lapis character doesn't look like metal. It looks like stone, as it should. Yeah. And that compares to the metal pieces, which do look like metal instead of like plastic or tin.
Yeah.
It's good reference done. A lot of planning he had to do with it. I've seen some of the sketches. They were phenomenal. And, you know, this is a piece that you're going to want in a future, like, museum show.
Yeah, no kidding. This is Gandalf arriving at Helm's Deep.
100%.
It's that feel, and it's it's the motif. It's the motif of War of the Spark. The good guys win. You know,
The good guy. But at this time, we didn't know that, which was
Exactly,
even
yeah.
better to see. Like, do these guys live? Do they die?
Yeah,
What's going on?
yeah.
You see a lot of guys in the background. But at that time, you're like, okay, I can see how this happens. The tide is turning. Neat. All right, Sam. What else you got in the set? Because
Yeah. So no, I was gonna set you up to dunk on Tammy.
Yeah.
Do you want?
I got some spicy ones. So I got my preview cards in, and basic lands, super fun, neat,
Yep.
cool. It's lands, great. Nothing weird about those at all. And then you get Kirsten's thing, and she's like, "Yeah, here's my island. It's cool." And I know Reddit's like, "Oh, they're not islands anymore. They're deconstructed." And I'm like, "Shut up, Reddit. It's fine. Just quit it. Go back to 1998 and play in your basement with unsleeved cards. Just do it." So instead, you have this idea of like, well, it's a city. It can't be like an island in the middle of an ocean. It has to be like island thematically, waterfall where it comes out of the place. And instead, she's like, okay, how am I going to make this scene though? So she first did this as like not traditional. She did it as just a normal digital sketch, and she did 2 bird's eye views. So one was the bird on top, and the other was like a bird on the ground, or the worm's eye view looking upward, right? And she chose the one from the top because neat, shows the eternal sun, the immortal sun sitting there, which helped, and it's obviously the area of the Azorius. And then she wireframed it. She straight up took like an AutoCAD class that you took in shop class.
Seriously.
And
This is like a capstone for every high school student doing CAD,
Totally. Like I could have done the sewing class, or I did AutoCAD, and I did AutoCAD, and I built like a cabin in a barn. It was kind of cool, I guess. Yeah. But like the amount of work that she put in to make this scene before, she even had a digital sketch. She could have just painted that better. And she's like, no, I want to build this from the ground up. I want the perspective to be perfect. I want it to be believable. I want it to feel like Eastern Europe, obviously where she's from. And you just don't see that. You don't see this level of, how do you get into magic? You need to make a wireframe of the freaking city. Like, this is the level you're at. And this is why someone like a Todd Lockwood is like, how do you stay in magic? And he's like, man, you know how hard it is against these young bucks? Like,
I know, yeah.
The amount of
fire, man.
The amount of effort here is just unbelievable. And that transitioned from hers to seeing Adam Paquette, who had 10 illustrations. I don't know how. Man must not have slept this set. Where you could see his planes, where it is a open plain, the military march, the Cold War showing of strength of sorts. But here it's in the middle of the war, the middle of the battle, and those blue armies are overwhelming. I mean, you can see Prague quite literally burning in place. And a simpler scene is you can zoom in here, right? You see people walking by, and you see more of the plain. You don't see much of the background. You can see the armies, and you can see things are burning. Instead, he zooms out not once, but 4 times to show you, I'm going to give you a whole cityscape. I'm going to show you the extent of the fire, and I'm going to show you the overwhelming amount of legions here, knowing that this is halfway through the war. And this is the area where they're coming out of the portal. They're still streaming out from Amonkhet, and it's not looking good. So having the ability to write that art description to say, Adam, yeah, we need to make you do a whole city scene. And yeah, there's armies there too. And you need to make it believable with fire. And you need to have the right lighting as smoke interacts with a dome.
Yep.
Go. Oh, P.S. You have 9 other illustrations. Love wizards. Like, what?
Yep. No, you're right when you said this set doesn't happen 10 years ago. You can't put a card called Planes and give and have this art. It just doesn't work 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We just didn't have that level of involvement with the narrative. We didn't have
it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to people. They're like, well, where are they? What's going on? And now it's well, of course, it's Ravnica, on the plains are plains, whatever, there's flat places, and having like the military there, so it feels almost Boros-y, but it's a play on the opposite side of it, which I think is done well. But that's not even my favorite art in the set, Sam.
I know.
That's not even my favorite art in the set.
I know you're going to talk about your favorite art. The last thing we'll say about this, though, is this is the image of War of the Spark to me. Like, this is, if we want to talk about location and place, if 10 years from now we're talking about world building, this is the snapshot of the current of all of it, you know, like that's it. So, all right, favorite dunk on me, Michael.
It has to be the 36. It's got to be one of the 36, right? Like you're gonna have great encapsulations of the time period, which we've had before. War Report was the best example of New Phyrexia. It's like, well, what happened with the war? Well, Phyrexians won. There's one card that explains that. Great. This is the piece to be like, what happened? There was a giant war. This doesn't give us the resolution, but it shows the war and the extent of the war. But as for the Planeswalkers, I tried to find what's different. What's something different? Not a person standing, in front of a thing and you're supposed to know where it is. Neat, cool. I want to see, show me something new. With 36 of them, you got to have some new compositions. As you mentioned, the Japanese walkers. Kyora's great example. Just a big old serpent beastie sitting behind her. I saw this piece. I saw the Sorin, and I couldn't stop looking at it. Like, I literally could not stop staring at this piece to say, like, well, this is a break in character. This doesn't work. And the more I stared at it, I'm like, no. This is 100% on point. This is exactly what Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord should look like. Tommy Arnold nailed this. Utterly nailed it. And it's a 4-drop Planeswalker, so it's going to be decent. And obviously the Japanese version of it with the anime one, it still shows the battle between him and Nahiri, which makes me laugh. But he's doing something a little unusual in that he's battling in the middle of a battle. And I know they're showing magic and things too, sure. But when you remove the card frame, you get to see where he is. He's standing on top of a church. So you're like, oh, okay. Well, you mentioned this before of, he's, medieval church, Baroque church. Cool. That's Innistrad, little tie-in, fun. But then you get more than that. You're like, well, what was Sorin? Oh, yeah, he was stuck in the stone for a while. Okay, well, he wasn't eating anything. That's not good. You're going to be hungry. So he comes out of there, gets the Ravnica somehow. We don't know how yet. And he's bloodlust. He's feasting. He's not his normal controlled self where he made the angel to have the white and the black balanced on his plane. Here he's just rage. He's everything negative that is connotated about a vampire. And Tommy went in there and he's like, all right, let's get some motion. We're going to get some blood off screen with a sword that clearly just cut something. We're not going to tell you what it is. But it's going to encourage you to see the art and say, what is happening here? Who is he fighting? Whatever. 4 years from now, you're going to look at this to be like, what is he doing again? And then you dig in, it's like, oh, he's fighting Nahiri again. Yeah. Why is he fighting Nahiri? Because she put him in stone. Why did she put him in stone? And it backs up this narrative that they've had for so long that you don't generally get that. Usually the story is told and then you move on to the next thing. Elspeth died, got killed by the god, hubris, whatever. Fine. But you don't get to revisit that in the future. And by one image, it gives you a step into that beautifully rendered, beautiful picture, a new Planeswalker sort of pose in the right setting that still speaks to the plane, but yet still speaks to himself as a Planeswalker. Beautifully painted. I'm blown away by it. I think it's phenomenal.
It's super cool. I want to talk a little bit about composition here because you mentioned the blood. It's quite fun the way the blood is like mimicking his flowing robes. That adds to this really elegant amount of motion. It's elegant. It's gory to a certain extent, but it's almost like the blood just is a symbol for this hunger that he has. That's kind of how it's reading and flowing away from him. It's not supposed to be like, obscene. It's supposed to be kind of elegant. So I like that, that double
it's
mix.
Not explicit. Yeah, I get that totally. Instead of it like dripping down on him, which could be a little cheesy, instead it's like a magical spell thing. And you're like, okay, this is believable.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing. Continue.
Yeah. So the end, you squint your eyes. This is a fun kind of test and trick you can do when you're looking at art. Squint your eyes, and what do you see? You have largely 3 colors. I mean, this is 3 tones essentially. It almost, which adds to kind of the painterly quality. I know he works digitally, but like that's an element of painting, traditionally that you have to keep in mind. Usually you have just fewer tones to work with. Otherwise it becomes convoluted. And so we have this beautiful contrast of this very dark figure in the front with a very light backgrounds, this like washed out, lightly yellow, brownish, which usually you can do the opposite, but this works even though it's almost a silhouette. And then just the tiny bit of crimson for the blood, and that's largely it. Those are the three colors here. And then lastly, like, we still do have that element of like planeswalker and a place, but like you said earlier, what I looked at, just because I got, I looked at structures, I looked at architecture for 3 straight months, and I was obsessing over it. Looking back at your article on architecture on Innistrad, how cool that the one link between Ravnica and Innistrad is the Gothic Cathedral.
Totally.
And the Gothic Cathedral, playing with that trope and archetype, is the vampire. That's what Innistrad sold up, and so I thought it was a really perfect, like, if I'm writing this art description, of course I want Sorin jumping off the Gothic Cathedral. It wouldn't make sense anywhere else, Right. I don't want him on the Azorius Dome. I don't want him in the Gruul Turf. Like, I want him interacting with that one building that connects these two worlds. So it was a fun way to, like, how do you put 36 planeswalkers on one plane? Well, we find those little tiny motifs that work with where they were before. If Kiora is like the squid monster lady, how can we get her near some water? If Sorin is the Gothic vampire, well, I better put him on that building that calls back and harkens back to his home plane. So it was a really fun way to situate a character in a way that is legible and believable and makes sense, and then allowed Tommy Arnold to just riff and I mean, he talk about artist that everyone should be looking at. He's another one that's just quietly like dunking on everyone. So.
Well, he had the big piece in Dominaria that we were all talking about so much, that I called out specifically because I was like, this is not human. And he hasn't had that many cards, really.
Wait,
like,
which one was that?
The Syncopate with the Teferi.
Speaking of faces in the back, right? That was another one where he just have this statue in the back that everyone overlooked. There's a whole face behind there. No,
everyone missed it in the Syncopate, right? Like, I was looking at his hand so much. I'm like, whoa, that's so subtle. And you're like, oh yeah, that's a giant face back there. And everyone's like, what?
Yep. And I've loved Scholar of Stars. It's so quiet and beautiful. It's just so beautiful and simple. Like, there's nothing much to that card. It almost doesn't read Magic to me. Just to decide.
But as a core set, it's perfect.
Yeah,
core set is perfect. We saw it back in Patron of the Vein when he first did that piece, and you're like, whoa, he's gonna be good. He's gonna be good
with the guy. Yeah, you're right. No kidding. And his name's
But you
Tommy.
can see the blood started there. Like,
true.
He had it in Patron of the Vein, that he brought it into here to say, okay, I use it as an element. How can I make it more integrated into the scene? And clearly give him a planeswalker. And some people raise to that level. You got a legendary with Rona, and here he's like, I'll flex a little bit here. That looks great.
Do you want to mention these two other pieces you highlighted really quick?
I'll do real quick before we wrap here. Just Micah Epstein. We got to talk. The other side of the Sorin battle is Nahiri. There, he had two pieces in the set that really stood out to me simply because how quiet they were. And if people don't notice his art a ton, he doesn't have a giant social media presence. He only has quite literally 4 cards. But these two pieces here, they're both just combat-y tricks, right? Nahiri Stoneblades, Encouraging Crisis. But the Nahiri Stoneblades it looks like a Chris Ron piece. The values are incredibly good. This is digital, and it's so hard to do that. It's so hard to not have something be transparent that's not supposed to be. That it's so painterly in that sense, where you could see that he limited his palette. Focus heavily on the character. He still had accomplishments he had to do with the art description, having Sorin in the background, which, you got to cover all the bases there. But seeing those two pieces, this is how you go from 4 cards to a Planeswalker. But by pieces of that Nahiri Stoneblades, you could see, wow, you have bricks in the background there. The blades look fantastic. This is all believable. And then his other piece, it's a perfect study in motion that is in the whole set, and this slows everything down. You can see the after effects of what's happening on the plane, what's happening with the dirt. Encouraging Crisis, look at the character's face. The tears there that, this person has passed away. It meant something to this character here. And by having that in, you can see this person has been fighting for years. Like, this is the father of this character here. and this battle wasn't quick. This was an exhausting battle for the plane, and people fought with everything they had. Every family member was involved, all encompassing the plane. And really, at the end of the day, it's just a character study between two characters. And this could be on any plane, but they still have the ability in Wizards to have these quiet works where it's a family love of things and a reflection piece in there. And if you have an artist that can really slow down that scene, it's a really special thing. Instead of all out war, everybody's fighting, everyone's punching, whatever, you could still have, we're going to have a remembrance scene in there. So I just think those are really great to see, and I think there's going to be some really great artwork coming out of him fairly soon, because these are leveling up pieces. Same as Sid's, same as Tommy's. We're going to see more of that. So on that, since we're getting long here, Sam, what can we take away? What can we take away at the end of the day? And thinking to wrap, your final thoughts.
So a question we have. So like I said at the header, like we're talking about this now because we're at the climax of the action. We're at the climax of release date. It's gonna release soon, and then 2 months from now we're gonna move on from War of the Spark, because that's how Magic moves. So a question then therefore is, we're all excited about it now. We're capturing the light in the bottle, but what does it look like 5 years from now? What do we look back on and remember from War of the Spark? Or the flip side is like, how does this change the narrative design, the mechanical design, just the marketing for the next 5 years? Like, what do you feel like this is a turning point for Magic? I think every Magic player does. We just turned a corner and opened up a whole new way to debut a set. We opened up a whole new way to tell stories across multiple sets. Ethan posted the beautiful picture of all the booster packs lined up. He's like, this is it. This is the arc since Kaladesh. And you look at it and you're like, holy smokes, there have been quite a few sets. Like Ixalan was in there too. And Ixalan mattered because it was tied back to the Immortal Sun, which was showing up on War of the Spark. So to me, it's almost like this might be the future of Magic. If 10 years ago it was 3-set block, core set, 3-set block, core set, and not a lot of overlap in the worlds, like Theros, did not interact with Ravnica at all. Suddenly we have these sets that are doing this gigantic, they're weaving together all of these elements. I think for any Magic player, it's like, well, one, how do we top this? I mean, just because it's been so gigantic. And two, you said at the top, zeitgeist. Like, is this the moment that we're in where we want our stories to, to be character centered? We want them to be, structured in such a way that we can reset every 10 years if we want to. You can think back to Ravnica 7 years ago. We went back to Ravnica 7 years before that. That's when Ravnica started. So if we were to follow that same model just for hypothetical purposes, in 7 years, what does Ravnica look like? How does it, where do we go from here? Or do we just start over and do a whole new thing with Tarkir and Theros and and Shadowmoor or whatever?
It's a possibility, and I think that posing that question, Sam, I think we already know. We always get trapdoors or things get locked away in a fridge for us to revisit. Obviously, Emrakul's in a moon, right?
Yeah, we forgot about that.
Emrakul's in a moon. Like, we have Nicol hanging out in a meditative plane, right? Like, yep. They're just kicking it until Lex Luthor rounds him up again and gets the Legion of Doom together.
Exactly.
Right? Which is what they did here. That idea, though, to say, what is the future of it? I don't know if the big bad will be the future. Obviously, people want to hear about Merit Lodge and where that's going. People want to know about the Raven Man and that conclusion. People want to get Elspeth back out of the underworld and how that shakes out. But at the same time, I do think this is building in gray planeswalkers. I think that is this is the called shot that the only one I have, Sam, is that planeswalkers will become more than monocolored, as you said. They can't be. Where Liliana is selfish. Selfish isn't good or evil. You can do good things and still be a selfish person. And likewise, someone like Anissa could be horrifically evil. And I think looking into the Gideon with the Black Blade, a cursed blade, but yet he's the all figure of good, I think is the spot. I think that is the piece that we can look to see to say, that's what you're testing. you're trying to see, can you make Jace break with that from time to time? Could a Johnny ever do something selfish? Like the Spider-Man killing Gwen, right? Like, can we have those moments? And then it forces us to have more adult conversations about these branded characters, but also just about human nature, that it's more interesting to have a shades of gray, shades of good, shades of evil. And D&D leans into this really heavily, but Magic hasn't done it yet. It hasn't quite defined what is good and what is bad. It just says, well, we have a color pie, and people have always wanted that to be better defined. How do you have evil white? Like, oh, it's fascism. It's like, well, yeah, okay, but what else? And that piece is where I can see it going with different planeswalkers. Like Obelixlith, we saw, slight previews that he's actually working with Karn because he's selfish. He's not evil. So I'm calling that here, and I look forward to that with like the Wanderer being able to switch through planes all the time, and these weird characters that are just self-interested, but they're not like Nicol Bolas where he's got schemes. It's like, well, why did you do that? Well, I don't think about consequences, and having that granularity there. But as for, I think I still have to go back to your point, Sam, where do you go with planeswalkers everywhere? Do you have a set now that has 0 planeswalkers?
Yeah.
Can you even do that anymore?
Yeah, can you do that anymore? It seems like, well, you open the door to have more mechanically interesting planeswalkers, so you can't leave that, unexplored, because now we have uncommon walkers, and they're such a big face of the set, But you're right, I think that after such a gigantic scope of a project, you want, naturally, to slow down and do something simpler. In the same way, an album, in the middle, you have a 12-minute gigantic song. The next one is just going to be a light, easygoing, acoustic little, pop song or whatever. You want to transition into something a little more quiet with some conflict and some interest, but you want to. It
won't be storyline driven. I think you're right on that. I think the next block will not be long narrative needed, and I think the block after that will be. So like looking at it, Theros won't be the next block. It'll be the one after that.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Because that's the loose end. That is the loose end that needs to be tied up, but we can't go right into that because it's fatigue.
Yeah, and there's little hints. I think I posted, we talked about Deicide, but there's some parallels in the art description from Deicide to the leap, the Gideon's, Gideon's leap thing. Right. So you're right. That's the biggest question now, I think, other than all you Vorthos wanting to know who the Raven Man is and whatnot. Oh. But but the Theros thing, we have to go back. It's time. It's quite literally time. If we've been following a 7-year structure, it's been almost 7 years since Theros. So
has it been that long, Sam?
6 years, man. 6 years.
We're getting there, bud.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, this was fun. We'll have to do this a little more than like once a year. I swear.
This is what we need. We need it once a year, so it's so good.
I guess so. Like, keep them waiting for it.
Yeah, man. Do you know that it's back to that old saying, like, the days are long and the years are short? It really doesn't feel like long ago since we've done this, but
it really doesn't. Well, again, Kaladesh didn't feel that long ago either, Sam.
No kidding. Okay.
Well, for all
what
the
year is it?
Where am I? For everyone that stopped by today, thanks again. You can find, myself online at Vorthos Mike. It's an easy Google. Sam, where can they find you?
I'm at Rhystic Studies on Twitter, Rhystic Studies on YouTube, and the University of Texas at Austin, teaching Italian studies for now. So, dude, thank you so much. This was a blast. I'm so glad I got to talk to you.
I'm excited that we had our second art chat, and I can't wait for the third.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Donzo. All right, I got Donzo.